an effort that would make it a lot harder for drivers to get behind the wheel without a license will be on the table in the upcoming legislative session. We talk about that today with the bill's sponsor, Senator Cam Ward of Alabaster. Senator, welcome back to Capitol.
Thanks for having me.
Also with us today is Captain Neil Fettner with the Clanton Police Department, who actually helped Senator Ward put this bill together. Captain, welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir.
I will begin with you, Senator. How big of a problem is this unlicensed driving thing in Alabama?
Well, it is a real problem, and unfortunately our southeastern neighbors have done a much better job of addressing than we have. You know, public safety should be one of the first and foremost issues that any legislature deals with, and this is it's a problem. But not only that, we need to make sure we're talking with our local law enforcement on how best to address it. And luckily we've had officials like this officer here from Clanton who stepped forward to bring it to our attention on how big of a problem it really is and why we need to talk about it more, why we need to address it. Hopefully with legislators working with local law enforcement officials, it's something we can address. But is it a problem? Absolutely. You ask the hundreds of people out there who've been involved in accidents with people who didn't have a license to be on the road how big of a problem it is, and they'll tell you it is.
Captain Fettner, in dealing with Senator Ward and putting together this bill, I guess Clanton is kind of unique because it has a major interstate that runs through it, and you might see a lot more unlicensed driving just because of that, right?
Absolutely. We have probably 20 to 30,000 people that pass through our town every day, either traveling north to Birmingham or coming from the north end of the county, coming south into the Montgomery area. And with the numbers, of course, you're going to have more moving violations, and that just happens to be one of the many.
Now, Senator, the way the law is now, of course, we ticket unlicensed drivers if we catch them, but that's kind of where it stops, and we're looking to extend that, right?
It's a little more than a slap on the wrist right now, and that's the problem. If you look at places like Georgia, which really has a very stringent law, they actually will arrest you and put you in jail in Georgia right now for driving without a license. Our law, the bill we're proposing, doesn't go that far, but it does have some real teeth in it with regard to confiscation of the vehicle and so forth. If you don't do that, all you're doing is you're giving them a green light to continue driving without a license, whether they've had a suspended license due to a DUI, whether they never bothered to get a license to begin with. They're a threat to the safety of the roadways. And if you don't do anything more than the slap on the wrist we do now, then you're not really providing a deterrent in order to require them to get a license.
Might, under the law as proposed, they actually have to come in and pay a fine almost immediately?
They would, but I mean, it's in addition to that, you know, the issue is right now, it's almost not worthy for the police officer to even pull them over. You know, right now it's just a slap on the wrist. So when you're just paying this fine, anyone who doesn't have a license would say, well, you know what, the cost of me going through, whether it's a DUI program or something else to get my license back is not worth it compared to, I'd rather pay the fine instead. And that's your problem. There's just not a deterrent under the current law. And we have a large number of accidents in our state for people who don't have licenses. And that's not fair to those who are law-abiding citizens who took the time to get their license or maintain their license in a law-abiding fashion.
Neil, how big of a frustration was it for law enforcement under the law as it's written now?
Well, it's very frustrating, and it's frustrating to the officer at the officer level, but it's also frustrating to the victim of the crime, being involved in an accident where someone didn't have a license or insurance. They look at us and they say, well, what are you going to do with this individual? And we say, well, we've written them a citation. That's all we can do. And at that point in time, the victim doesn't think that we're doing our job because they're not getting the satisfaction that they want as the victim of the incident. So by being able to remove that person from the roadway, place them in jail, the victim can be told at that point in time, look, we've removed them from the roadway, we're towing their vehicle, and give them a little more satisfaction as opposed to just writing this person a ticket and then being able to leave the scene in their vehicle knowing that we know that they have a license.
In a sense of security too, Don, because at the same time we've had families, there was a family 2 years ago in Hoover where their daughter was killed in a car accident. And the person who was driving the other vehicle did not have a driver's license. Their license had been suspended due to a DUI. They had actually had 2 DUIs and they were still driving, didn't have a license, and you know, when the family comes forward to the victim, they say, what can you do about it? What are you going to do about it? You know, the DUI or the negligent part, yes, but as far as driving without a license, not much you can do but give them a citation. And that's not fair to those families.
I read a statistic recently, Senator. I think the number was like close to 20,000 citations for unlicensed driving in Alabama in the last year. There were even more than that the year before. So I think that really points up the need for this legislation.
There is need, and again, there's need because it's already against the law, but once again, you're not creating a new law, you're adding penalties to something that's already illegal. And until we make it enough of a deterrent, those numbers will not go down.
When you pull people over for unlicensed driving, Neil, I assume you hear a lot of excuses, for lack of a better way to put it. Everything from I don't have a license, period, to I left it at home. And whatever they tell you, they're basically let go with a citation, right?
That's right. Of course, officer has the discretion to make a case, but the worst thing that can happen at this point in time is the person would be issued a citation, which is generally a summons to appear before the judge to enter their plea. And that's all we have at this point in time.
This was a big enough issue for you and the Clanton PD, as well as the police departments from other areas, that you felt motivated to work with your senator to get this bill drawn up.
Yes, sir. The motivation came just being an officer for 10 years and dealing with these issues and hearing the complaints from the victim side many times. We said, let's look at the other states around us in the country, see what they're doing, and we found out that Alabama is just one of a handful of states that do not have laws on the books already that would allow us to do these things.
You know, Don, too, a very important point you just made. Good example, I leave home without my license. I have a valid driver's license. I left home without it.
Right.
You're not going to go to jail for that.
Right.
I mean, that's not what you're after here. What you're after is the person who, one, never took the opportunity to get their driver's license, or two, has had it lawfully suspended. You know, the kid who forgets a license at home, this is not what you're going after here, and this law is not going to hit them. Where it's going to hit at is that person who has been knowingly and willfully avoiding the law, requiring to have a valid driver's license and having one on hand.
Indeed. Because, Neil, if somebody tells you, I have a license but I left it at home, you can verify that pretty quickly, right?
Yes, sir. By name and date of birth, we can look them up. We can look them up by their social security number. And the good thing about the technology that we have now in the cars, we actually have a photograph. If they have a license, we can look at the picture of the person on the computer in the car and then verify, yes, that's the person behind the wheel, and it is who they say they are. In years past, it was easy to give your brother's social security number and, you know, be able to memorize that and pass yourself off as another individual.
Right.
But now with the technology in place, we can kind of catch that at the ground level.
Senator, it seems, I guess, everybody thinks they're going to be the one who gets away with it in terms of knowing they don't have a valid driver's license and hoping they never get caught or pull over, but the law of statistics usually will catch up with them eventually.
Absolutely, and remember, first and foremost, the issue is public safety. The reason that person doesn't have a license, whether it was suspended or they never got one, there's probably a good reason for that. They probably don't need to be on the roadway to begin with. That's the key, making sure that these people aren't out driving when they're not qualified or for some legal reason have been denied the ability to drive. We should make sure we protect the public first and foremost.
Neil, some of those good reasons that the senator alludes to for having a suspended driver's license, I assume that's DUI, maybe excessive speeding, those sorts of things?
Right. Predominantly in the state, you lose your license for a DUI conviction, possession of marijuana, multiple traffic infractions over a period of time where you accrue points on your driver's license. You could be suspended for that. You could also be suspended, let's say that you had a warrant in another county or something and you never appeared in court, then they could file to have your license privilege revoked at the state level that way as well.
Senator, it must have been invaluable having direct law enforcement input on this bill.
Well, I'm not in law enforcement. Neil is. So anytime you can sit down and visit with local law enforcement, they can tell you what real world problems are. It makes my job as a legislator a lot easier. They understand some of the things that's going on the ground that I don't, but having their input is what makes laws like these, makes it much more well thought out and better, as opposed to some of the knee-jerk approaches we see to other issues.
Cam, I think I read that you also work with some people from the Talladega Police Department as well.
We've talked actually with 3 or 4 different police departments, but however, Neil here with Clanton is the one who brought it to my attention originally.
Is initial support looking pretty good?
I think so. It's very hard to argue against it. Again, it's already illegal to drive without a license. So what you're really doing is enhancing the penalties for doing it. So it's going to be very hard to make a logical argument against this.
Senator, along these same lines, I'd love your input on one of the new laws that went into effect at the first of the year was one that really clamps down on uninsured motorists from getting behind the wheel. You now have to have proof of liability insurance. If they pull you over, they can demand proof on the spot. Can they?
Yeah, what was happening before is people were going in to get in Alabama you have to have liability license. Well, or insurance, I should say. What was happening is when they were going in to show proof of insurance, they were showing the proof, and then the next day they could cancel the insurance.
Yeah.
Well, it's not fair to someone who goes out, is driving down the road, law-abiding citizen, obeying the rules, and they're hit by someone and they have no recourse whatsoever to recover the damages that have occurred, whether physically or monetarily to them. Right now under the law, if you're not required to show that proof of insurance, there is no incentive to make sure you have to have your insurance, which is the law. Again, this is an issue very similar to the driver's license. The number one job should be the protection of those who are innocent, who are abiding by the rules, following the law, and yet they're the victim of an accident or some other action. They deserve to be compensated. And these insurance laws are required, and it should be. It should be for the protection of those victims.
As I understand it now, if you're pulled over and you can't provide proof of coverage on your car, they can actually tow your car?
Yeah.
Yeah. I assume that's up to their discretion. But,
yeah, I think that's up to the individual discretion.
Is that right, Neil?
Well, I'll have to look at the new law. I haven't looked at it that in depth to be able to answer that question thoroughly today.
But at the very least, that discretion lies there, and that's part of the tough new aspect of this law.
You need that law, though, because without that law, there's so many people that were skirting around it. There were so many people who were getting the very cheapest of liability insurance they could. As soon as they got the necessary information they need to be able to drive on the roadways, they were canceling the insurance. So they were cheating the system. And again, that's not fair to those who abide by the rules and follow the law.
Senator, while you're here, I'd like to talk about some other matters that will be probably pressing as the new legislative session kicks into high gear. There are a flurry of bills now dealing with guns in Alabama, and I guess it's a reaction to what's going on around us, not the least of which was the Connecticut school massacre, and we've looked at other mass shootings in the United States in the last year, and that always renews talk of gun control and new gun legislation. But at the same time, there's a contingent out there who thinks that maybe this is knee-jerk, that we're overreacting just a bit. How do you feel about it?
I really feel like it's a knee-jerk reaction. What concerns me the most is, and there was a horrible tragedy that occurred in Connecticut with the school shooting. We all feel for those families that are going through these terrible times. The problem I have is, first of all, Connecticut has some of the toughest gun control laws in the nation. It did not stop this individual from committing what was a terrible act. Are there things that we can do to improve our security system in schools? Sure, there are. But I think the way to do that is to sit down with local law enforcement like Neil here, sit down with local school officials, educators, people who are dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, and ask them for suggestions and ideas on how we can improve security. I think the idea of legislators coming down here and filing a bunch of bills to say that we're doing something, therefore you should feel safe, I think that's very emotion-driven, and I don't think it's really taking the time to think through what's going to be smart about security in our schools. And then on the other side, there are folks who want to clamp down on gun rights, and I'd be against that as well too. I think we have enough laws in the books as it is with regard to gun control. I don't think we need any more. So a lot of the flurries, a lot of reaction to what happened. It was a tragedy. However, I think as legislators, we need to be extremely slow before we go out and start passing a flurry of new laws.
You also work with the Prison Oversight Committee. We are in a new budget year now. Voters, of course, approved the September referendum, which we borrowed money from the general fund to help prop up some of the general fund agencies, including corrections. That keeps them level funded. We're still facing some struggles where that's concerned, but at least we remain level funded, right?
We do. And prisons for now, they're still always going to be teetering on the edge. I do think that some savings have been found with regard to health care providing, the health care provisions they have, and also with regard to a couple other savings in which should slowly start reducing some of the needs in their budget. However, prisons for at least the near foreseeable future is going to continue being a problem for us, one that we're going to have to always watch.
You co-chaired the Judiciary Committee, do you not?
I chair Judiciary.
You chair. Yeah. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges with our court system, for instance. Again, the courts were another beneficiary of the level funding provided through borrowing from the trust fund. But again, that's level funding. We still got to look long-term at some of the court system's problems.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a couple of things. One, we're going to have to look at how we allocate our resources. You know, we have some areas that were granted judgeships many years ago and now have lost a lot of their population, yet they still have the same number of judgeships than, say, an area that has grown tremendously over the last 20 years that has, that really needs that. Your court docket is overloaded. We're going to have to start allocating judges more and more based upon where that court docket is as opposed to geographic or political concerns. So I think that's a reform that several of us are going to look at this session, and something that's long overdue. It's not going to be easy, and it's not something anyone likes to talk about, but the first and foremost matter is people deserve a right to a trial, whether it be criminal or civil, and they deserve it to be in a timely fashion. Right now, we're not providing that. We can improve upon that system, but here in Montgomery, we're going to make some hard choices to get that done.
Efficiencies in the court system and really efficiencies across the broad spectrum of state government will be another priority this session.
Streamlining state government, that's one of the meetings we were down here today about, streamlining state government. Every area that we can streamline, combining agencies that provide duplicate functions, we need to do it. We're going to have to, because We have to live within our means. We have a certain amount of money to live within. Medicaid continues to rise, and some of it we don't have control over, some of it we do, but we've got to figure out how to tackle that.
We borrowed this money from the trust fund for a period of 3 years. Is 3 years enough time, do you think, for us to put some of these serious efficiencies in place and solve some of our budget problems?
I hope we can do it sooner than that, and I hope that we can start a plan this session on how we're going to start repaying that money back to the trust fund. I think there's a consensus among a majority of the members in the Senate that we want to pay it back, and there are several plans that are being developed now that should be introduced the first day of the session that would start outlining how we'll pay that money back, so yes.
You brought up Medicaid, and that's one of the biggest problem areas that we'll be looking at this session and moving forward. Obviously, we have our own unique set of Medicaid funding problems, on top of which now we have to comply with the Affordable Care Act, and that adds on a whole new layer. Are these challenges surmountable?
We have to. We don't have a choice. I mean, the people elected us to fix these problems, and they are probably the most difficult challenges we've ever faced in the general fund. Medicaid is not going to go away. It's always going to be with us. We've got to figure out how to reform it, make it more efficient. Will that be hard? Yes. With the Affordable Care Act provisions coming down, it does make it harder. But I believe we can do it. Now, it's going to require some pain, and that's the problem that a lot of folks, if you want this to be an easy way out, it's not going to happen with Medicaid. But Medicaid, more than anything else, is the one area of government that we're going to have to fix and reform if we're ever going to have a good, stable budget in Alabama.
Do you agree with the governor's position that we need to fix it before we expand it?
Absolutely. We can't afford to operate what we have now. I can't imagine us ever expanding it.
Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, final analysis, Neil, on the bill that would really clamp down on unlicensed drivers. How much better off would you and law enforcement be if this bill passes?
I think we'll be 100% better off because we're going to solve a lot of problems. We're going to satisfy the victim when they've been a victim of a crime, because why was I a victim of a crime? This person wasn't supposed to be operating on the highway. And by being able to take action and remove them from the highway, I think we're going to get satisfaction from the community. Because a lot of times they look at us and they say, well, you're not doing anything. And they don't understand that we have laws and things that we have to adhere to, and we can't do anything further than what we've already done.
Plus, removing some of that frustration level on your end, where you feel like you're kind of limited into what you can do.
Absolutely, that would help, and that'll improve morale. And morale is always good when everybody's happy and moving on. The world turns better that way.
So, a final analysis, Senator Ward. The crux of your bill here would do
public safety first. If you don't have a driver's license, you never got one, or it's been suspended, then the penalty is going to go up for the crime you're committing. End of the day, the legislature has one fundamental obligation as government, and that is protect its citizens. It's a public safety measure. It's one that's already on the books. We're going to increase the penalties and hopefully make it a deterrent to drive without a license.
Indeed. Neil Fettner is a captain with the Clanton Police Department. Neil, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, sir.
And Senator Cam Ward of Alabaster, always nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me back.
You bet. And Capitol Journal, we'll be right back.